Hey guys, it's been a while, a few weeks or a couple months actually. Um, a bit of life happening, but we're back on and definitely going to be consistent in the weekly shows that we're going to be doing. I actually, I made a strategical decision in the first few episodes where I filmed a lot concurrently, and what actually a lot of what happened. I filmed an episode, and then a lot of stuff happened after, where potential content was kind of related, or maybe it would have potentially changed how I would have approached something. But it is interesting. There's so much that's happened over the past 3 to 4 months in the world. And so, filming all these episodes in December and releasing them, staggering them as these things are happening, it's kind of like, wow, there's just such a stark difference between what the political and social climate was like, in December, compared to now. And I also started thinking a lot about kind of the content I wanted to put out, and the intention behind this podcast, and also how I want to produce and display the media. So clipping is a big part of podcasts, and putting clips out there. And once I started doing that, I definitely saw like the vanity side of things, which I didn't necessarily like. And for me, this is it's a passion project. I want to put out ideas that are worth discussing in the social climate of which we live. And I hope that this is a way to effectively kind of communicate the ideas that I want to get across, but also avoiding that label of influencer. Not that I'm there yet or anything like that, but I just think that the I call the environment of podcasts has changed a lot, and I think I alluded it to another episode where when you see someone in good lighting and with a microphone and talking to someone about something, it is that level of self importance, and that is just part of how things are, but. Hopefully you can see, as I said in the content that I've got, that you can see how I'm trying to, I guess, make a point of difference and bring myself away from the content while still giving people that visual element of seeing who is speaking this. But having said that, today isn't going to be a serious topic per se. Let's say like nothing, that's global catastrophe, but it's going to be about dating apps. So when I think of the current climate of dating apps, I think it's a very complex climate, and you're going to get a lot of different opinions. And I think there is something fascinating about dating apps that, for me, is something that is quite intriguing. And I think that if you ask females compared to males, and again coming from a heterosexual perspective, that you will see a lot of different kind of narratives and how it benefits someone or maybe doesn't benefit somebody else. And when I think about like dating, right? So like me personally, I was of adult age when the first dating apps really came out, like the really like the modern dating apps, and that is to say Tinder, right? So I remember when Tinder first came out, and it was a very, very different kind of landscape to what it is now. And there wasn't any limitations on how many likes you could do. There wasn't any super likes or prompts or videos. It was, you just put up like 6 or 9 pictures and you just swipe, and you had the kilometers. And I would have been pretty young when this was, maybe around 20, if I recall correctly, something like that. Maybe a bit older, in fact, but I think around 20 actually. And like I said, like it was very novel. There was a novelty because all of a sudden, you could this whole psychology or structure of the swipe, right? Swiping left, swiping right. There was a huge novelty towards it, and everyone was on Tinder, right? Well, at least in my demographic and the people I associated with, around up to say 25, 26, everyone was using it around there, right? So, fast forwarding to where we're at now, And we've got, multiple popular dating apps, and you've got the super like, you've got limitations on like, you've got the gold membership, whatever it is, and subscription where you pay to have priority likes and all these things. And you think about where we went from all those years ago, over a decade ago, to where we're at now. And I think what's very on brand or very on topic right now is that whole masculinity and also manosphere conversation. It is something that I've spoken about a couple times. I even did an episode on someone called Clavicular, who has skyrocketed as one of the biggest streamers at the moment. And I actually did this episode like a few months ago as that kind of profile was rising. It's just the whole episode I actually called him Clavicle, which I was like, can I still use that? Maybe, but and I have misnamed people before. One in mind, Luke Bateman, I called him Luke Bailey, who they're both rugby league players, but very different people. So I didn't really use that episode, and over those months since I filmed that, it's like his profile has only grown and grown. And he is part of that kind of manosphere where it's like we're looking at the children of Andrew Tate, as say the person that really popularized that kind of culture, and you look at the people that are currently there now, that are popular, right? And people that use that kind of same strategical, let's say, propaganda or strategical material to draw people in. And one thing that, while that's very on brand, because obviously I watched, the Louis Theroux documentary, as did many people, and it was very interesting. And I think something that doesn't really get addressed much, and this is just something that I believe in, and I think I do have to kind of tread carefully, but I'll do that as best as I can. These are my point of view, and I do think there is validity in the point of view, because I think there's this balancing act where it's like, why do young men kind of gravitate towards these figures? And I think there's a climate out there that pushed them to go there, right? And I think that's a valid thing to say. It's like, well, obviously, there is external things that are happening, and I think there is this kind of narrative or perspective, especially among young women, that like it isn't necessarily their problem, which is I think true, right? But it's this kind of like it's that recognition of that splitting of ideology, right, where men and women are seeing eye to eye less and less. But one thing I think, in that conversation, as it's a present conversation that doesn't get spoken about, is the role of dating apps in creating the manosphere. And my personal opinion is that it's the silent kind of role player that also played a huge part, and in a way I think played one of the biggest parts of all to creating what we have in our current dating climate. Now, I know, speaking on dating apps as well, it's like risking. It's like I'm somebody on dating apps, or like and use them. It's like coming across as someone is like who maybe I'm not doing very well on them or something like this. But I do think it is an interesting social commentary to kind of look at what they actually are and what they promote, and also where we went, like how they started, and also how kind of our social kind of circles and how we socialize with the opposite sex has changed alongside the introduction of dating apps. And a big thing that I will bring up is how they're all owned by the same people. So like the popular ones, you've got Tinder, you've got Hinge. I think those are the two major ones. You've got Bumble, which again is a reasonably big one, puts the power, so to speak, in the female's hands, in the sense that women are the one to send likes or something like this, or they're the ones to initiate the conversation. And there's other ones like, I think there's one called Field, which is like, I guess, a bit more of a fringe one. I'm not sure if Match Group actually owns that. And a lot of, I know Match Group owns heaps of dating apps, but obviously, those are the main ones. And then you've also got Raya, which obviously I think people know it's kind of like, supposed, higher class people, or people a bit more well-to-do go on Raya. I've never been on Raya, so I can't speak for the experience on there. But I think the point being is Match Group owns the major ones. And in any kind of other industry, when we're talking about monopolies, like people show a bit of concern there, like the concern of a monopoly, right? And in multiple industries. And I think a lot of time people are a lot more aware of when there is a monopoly. And I think like Hinge, it was a reasonably recent acquisition by Match Group. It did not originate from Match Group, though Tinder, I believe, was something that was created by Match Group. And in my anecdotal experience and speaking with the people that I associate with, is that Hinge, slowly but surely is becoming like Tinderfied. And what I mean by that is Tinder, as I mentioned earlier, where Tinder, never used to have limitations on how many people you could like. It never had, gold memberships. It never had super likes. Over time, what it's done is it's made it harder and harder to get like a genuine match with people. And over time, it's developed more of kind of like a systematic way of doing things. Like the algorithm, like everyone, like people, it's common knowledge that the Tinder score exists, right, internally, that everybody gets a Tinder score, and it's basically like a rating out of 10, and it kind of is a real world indicator as to how desirable you are, right? Like how, where are you on the scale in regards to your Tinder profile. And over time, right, it's like there's because it's monetized so much more than ever before, there's more incentive to keeping people on longer, and there's more incentive to people to keeping like not only using longer but on the app longer. And because there's that incentive, there's the strategies that go along with it. So when we talk about men and women on the use of dating apps, every guy kind of has had that experience where they're sitting down with some girls that they know, and they speak about like matches and how many matches they get, whether it's on Tinder or Hinge or wherever. And every girl will have like way more matches than their guy constituents. Like it's so common for women to like literally have like hundreds of likes, towards them, or hundreds of matches or whatever it is. Whereas compared to guys, like it's literally like tenfold decrease, like 1,000% decrease. And it's way harder to get that level of numbers there. And it's because I believe it follows the same psychology as what makes like a nightclub popular, what makes a bar popular, and it is attractive women, right? Like when guys are going out to a bar, like they go to kind of places where they think there's going to be attractive women, and that's what makes a place popular. Even for other attractive women and other women, like in general, it's like if attractive women are going to a place, generally it means that most women, like that's popular, and that's going to be popular for guys. Like any kind of establishment knows, like you can't have like a bar or a club full of guys, like it's not going to be popular. And I think in the same vein, that's where dating apps have adopted that same psychology, right? It's like what makes a dating app popular when it comes to speaking like heterosexual interactions. It is whether there is attractive and desirable women using the app enough. So when guys go on it, there's enough of them to give them this idea, okay, like I will keep using this because there is desirable women on here. And so now that say, speaking with Tinder and also Hinge, I'll get to Hinge, but Tinder has that monetization where it's like if you're say paying for something, and there is experiences where like people pay and then they maybe their subscriptions come expiring, and all of a sudden they start to match with people that say are more attractive or more desirable for that person than all of the other people they've been matching with for the last couple of weeks. And so all of a sudden you think, oh, I was about to delete this, but I'm not going to delete this now because now I'm getting these matches. And then so you continue, and then all of a sudden they taper off. And it's kind of like, oh, like, well, that's a mystery. Like, why did that happen? Why am I all of a sudden, getting desirable matches for myself, and then all of a sudden it drops off to nothing? And it's similar like when you just open an account, like open a Hinge account, open a Tinder account, and you're getting all these matches, like, very, very quickly, but over time it just dwindles away. And it doesn't really give an explanation for that. It's like, have I just like exhausted the social circle, or what's actually going on? Is my profile like on the bottom of the pile? And then that's when you've got like the tiered payment, where it's like if you're not paying, then technically you are on the bottom of the pile. But even if you are paying and you're not getting any interest after initially getting interest, there's definitely something more at hand that's happening, right? And Hinge, I think people move to Hinge like I think in greater numbers because there was a reputation that Hinge was a bit more serious than Tinder. It was a bit less, fuck boy than Tinder. But over time, with Hinge, after being bought by Match Group, it's a similar instance where you initially sign up, and the male experience, you get more matches, and then over time, like it kind of dwindles. And then maybe the subscription is going to expire, whatever it is, and all of a sudden, you're getting more interest. And something a friend of mine was also talking about is that apparently, like people who engage more and have these more conversations, and say when they're sending matches and they write prompts and stuff like that, is that the algorithm or the system actually rewards those people who are more actively engaging, not just liking, but also sending the messages and having conversations and engaging with it. Is that the app rewards those kinds of people. Now, there's also on Hinge, like there's a section, it's called like standouts or highlights. And like to match with these people, you got to send the rose, right? So roses cost money, or you get one a week, and this on the standouts every day. It's like coincidentally, it's like the most desirable people for that particular person is in one section, but you got to pay to match with them, and there's no knowing as to like how long they've actually been using the app. Are they still on the app? And or even where they're at, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like, again, it's like kind of playing onto that mindset of the guy thinking, okay, like I should buy these roses because that's how I'm going to stand out, like in amongst the hundreds, thousands of people that are sending likes. And the people who are paying for these memberships, by and large, and I haven't verified this, but I don't think I need to, are men. 100%. I'm so confident in saying that, because why would a female like need to pay for the membership when, like I said, like you ask like the average woman and they're getting hundreds of likes, whereas compared to the average guy, like it's nowhere near. So the guy has to make himself stand out in a certain way, and that's where the tiered and the payments come through. And with that, right, it's like, okay, well, what is the commodity of dating apps then? Is it meeting somebody? No, it's attractive women. It's desirable women. That is the commodity. And that is what determines whether a dating app will be successful or not. Do desirable women use it? If they do not, then guys are not going to use the app. If they do, then guys are going to. And unbeknownst to women, whether they like it or not, they are being used as leverage to bring people on. Like when you look at the standout section, sure, it might be flattering to someone to hear like, oh, by the way, like you're in the standout section, which means, oh, you're a tier above everybody else. But they're using like the beauty and desirability of women or men in the standouts or whatever to prop up the app itself, right? Not only that, I also believe as well on Hinge that there's prompts that females can use and have access to that men do not, which again, I think shows how they have realized, what I'm talking about. And it's important to differentiate between the male experience and the female experience. Now, like baseline that, like we've established, like, okay, there's money now, massive money now involved with like the subscriptions and the super likes and the roses and things like that. So that's how it is, right? Like as a guy using these apps, realistically, you do have to kind of either, pay for, something higher or kind of, be okay with like getting a trickle of what the other people might be getting. And also at the same time, the people that do pay for those tiers and things like that are kind of ruining it for everybody else, because if people didn't engage in that, then they wouldn't do it. But because once they start putting in these tiers, people are going to engage with it, and it's set the ball in motion. So now, like Hinge is slowly turning more into Tinder, in a sense of those kind of paywalls, and also trickling down desirable matches for people based on where they're at on the subscription cycle, or how they engage in these kinds of things. Now, so we've gone over that, but what I want to also go into is the psychological effect. Now, I know I alluded to the fact that dating apps, or I directly said that dating apps, I believe, is a huge contributor to the manosphere and also incel culture, like involuntary celibate culture. And why is that, right? And it's because overnight, with the snap of the fingers, all of a sudden people could get what they wanted without leaving their house, right? You could meet up with a girl, you could invite somebody over, and you wouldn't even have to leave the house. And like I said, in the earlier days of using Tinder, like I remember as a young guy, like it was a lot easier. And obviously, like there's the age factor and things like that. But because there was that novelty and like there wasn't like these kind of common tropes with those kinds of things, like Netflix and chill. Like that's a I think honestly like that's like a dating app kind of expression. Like no one was talking about Netflix and chill until people would like message on dating apps or social media and say, hey, you want to come over, and chill and watch Netflix, right? So that's like all those things, and our entire like society of dating, it's changed to where dating apps used to be a fringe thing to the main way that people meet. It's like bars or dating apps. And dating apps, they definitely provided women like safety, right? They provided the ability to vet guys and also give people the decision of, okay, this person's wanting to talk to me, do I want to speak to them? Is it, does this person like seem like someone I want to associate with? And it definitely made, I guess, like interacting safer. Now obviously I know there's like anxiety with a lot of women of actually meeting up with somebody from a dating app as opposed to, say, having met them in person. But I think in if you were to look at who did dating apps benefit the most, I think at first I think guys probably benefited a lot, but I think over time women have reaped the major benefits from dating apps. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's a negative thing, right? But I just think that that's like the the way it is. And when I talk about how like I believe it's contributed to like that manosphere, is because what's happened, I think, is that it is absolutely harder for men to find a match or find a woman that's interested in them, right? And part of that reason, I believe, is because of, let's say, we'll call it the pile of men that every woman on a dating app has, right? And before those dating apps, those piles still existed, but they just weren't organized on our phones. They existed out in the world, unbeknownst to the individual. And the moment that you could compile that and organize it and put it in a pile, all of a sudden, the average woman realized, one, just how horny guys are, right? And the things that guys will say to try and, meet someone or have sex with them. But also, yeah, just the sheer number. So before, let's say you've got an average woman who, without these dating apps, would go out and meet people and things like this, and they would have, I guess, a preconceived kind of notion as to like who's in their league or not, right? And I'm using these kind of shallow terms because at the end of the day, like leagues exist, let's say, or people gravitate towards people that think they're on the same level as them. So I think regardless of who you are, like you have this idea as to, who you can interact with or who you can reasonably expect to be someone that you could romantically be involved with. And I think what occurred, right, is this realization to a lot of women that there's a lot of guys that they could be romantically involved with. They're everywhere. And so and not only that, like they're on hand at any time they really want. Like they don't go away. They stay there forever. Whereas on the other hand, guys didn't have those piles. They were the pile. They piled in. So you've got this experience of realizing, well, geez, like how many guys are actually, I could snap my fingers and any one of these 50 guys would come over and see me at the drop of a hat. Whereas on the other guy's experience is, damn, it's a lot harder to meet up with somebody. Why is that? Well, because you're just part of the pile. You're just part of the 50 guys, just part of the 100 guys, hundreds of guys, in some cases, right? And so what happens with those interactions is it's not enough necessarily just to be friendly or be hello, or say hello rather. it's not enough to do those things. You have to stand out. And it links closely, I think, to the attention economy that is like social media, where it's like we're competing for attention. And that's something that was in Louis Theroux's documentary with these manosphere guys, is it's an attention-based economy. And in the same way, the dating apps are like attention-based economy, where as a male, you're kind of like doing a bit of a peacock dance in the sense of like, hey, look at me, look at who I am and why I'm desirable. Look at why you should get to know me and why you should converse with me, and let me say something witty or whatever it is, and it has to be just right. It can't be too sarcastic. It can't be too unfunny, but you can't be too serious. And you kind of walk this line, and if you don't walk that line, well, see you later, because there's another few dozen people that are going to try and walk that line. And so with the attention-based economy, it's like it is very ADHD or ADD, where it's like, I'm no longer, it's like you message someone a few times back and forth, and there's nothing that's particularly been said wrong, but for some reason or another, the conversation is fizzled, and or if it gets to a point of wanting to meet somebody and they don't want to meet, and it's completely their prerogative of not wanting to meet or anything like that, but that's just what the experience is. Because and I think because, again, the average woman knows that there's 100 other dudes behind that door that are going to line up, and that she gets to pick from. So when I say like the dating apps have benefited women, I believe much more than what men have, because as a man in my position, it's like I'm having to put myself in that pile. Now I can make myself stand out from that pile by sending a rose or a super like and pay that money. But I think more and more that's it's devalued. Or I can have really, really cool pictures, or I can maybe be very witty or very good at writing, right? I can do those things, but at the end of the day, I'm still a part of the pile, and the pile accumulates. It doesn't go away, doesn't get less, it only grows. And the difference is between, say, prior to dating apps, is that the pile only really exists in if someone's accepted a number, or like if someone's given their number and they've accepted that, or within their vicinity. You go out, someone comes up to you, or men are coming up to you, but you go home and that stops. Whereas on the dating apps, it's 24/7, and like I said, it only grows, it never goes away. So for the average guy or above average guy or whatever it is, all of a sudden it's much, much harder to associate with people that you would perceive to be on your level, because whether you like it or not, you are in the pile with people that may never have had a chance with that particular person, but you're still in that pile. So there's that element. So when we talk about like incel culture and where it's grown, men finding it hard to talk with women. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why that's happened. Social media, video games, whatever it is, not socializing. But dating apps made it easier to try and meet someone without actually meeting them. It made it less desirable, or less like not much of a point to say walking up to somebody during the day, right? Or walking up to someone in a bar and saying, "Hey, how you doing? Like, my name's so and so," because why would you do that when you can just swipe? What's the point of trying to go meet somebody when the easy way is to do it this way? And so and this is the thing, like women saying, "Oh, guys don't approach, like what's going on with this?" And I think there's one aspect of like, "Oh, guys don't approach because we're told not to," or like, we want to respect women and their comfort zones and their space. But also, I think a big part of that is because it's much more normalized to swipe and go on these dating apps and use those instead of actually striking up a conversation with someone on the street, in a respectful way that, allows them the whether they choose to want to continue it or not, in a comfortable way, they can decide that. So I think that it plays a big element where it's like these people are trying less and less to socialize. And because they're in a attention-based economy when they're using the dating apps, they're not having that much success. And not only that, they're also competing with the upper echelon of the male candidates as well. So that's another element, because when we talk about the pile, right, the pile consists of say, highly desirable people, let's say, and also not as desirable. So when you're someone, let's say, who is not as desirable compared to, say, other people, and they exist, right? Previously, maybe you'd have a hobby and you'd meet somebody through that, and you'd be able to show your personality a bit, and that person kind of grows attracted to like the person that you are, as opposed to this rudimentary two-dimensional kind of persona that is on dating apps. So it's much harder to gain that other person's attention that may have been a suitable candidate, because again, there's so many other people beside you trying to do that same thing. um, and it's similar for when guys are liking girls as well, right? Like, so for example, if a very desirable woman was in a room in a bar, most of the time, the vast majority of guys are not going to approach that woman just based off being kind of intimidated. There might be some guys that come up and maybe they're a bit sleazy, they try to buy her a drink or whatever it is, and that may occur. But while it might be a fact that, say, every guy in that room would be attracted to that woman and would love to go on a date with that woman, there's no really way of really testing that and trying to find out. Whereas with dating apps, there absolutely is, because you could be this, like, quote unquote non-desirable guy or less desirable guy, and you see this highly desirable woman, and so you're gonna swipe yes, of course. You might even send a super like, you might even send a rose, right? So you put your name into the pile out of that Hail Mary, because you never know, because that's what the whole point of dating apps is. You like who you like, and you don't like who you don't like. But and like I said, what happens is the most desirable women would have an extreme amount of number of people that would have never usually approached her, but they've indicated their interest. So for the people that she may consider, it makes it a lot more difficult, because they're literally in the sheer number of people that have said, "Hey, I'm interested in you," um, and it's much more difficult to stand out with that. Now, does that benefit the woman in this example? A lot of people would say, yeah, of course, because she's seeing, well, how desirable she is. She's seeing what power she really has, because why would she ever settle when she knows that she could have anybody she wants, right? And that's perfectly valid. But you've got to question as well, it's like, what happens to that person, and that expectations that that person would have of their partner. Like, if someone is of the belief and the evidence that they can get really anybody they want, then how do you pick that person, right? And how do you have that person compete with that huge amount of attention and desirability from other men that occurs? But that's, I guess, a bit of a different topic. But coming back to in the aisle, or the realm of male experience to women experience, every guy has, and probably every woman as well, every girl has experienced the moment when you match with somebody and you kind of forgot that you swiped yes on that person, and you kind of think, did I match with that person? Like, oh, like, I'm kind of like, I'm surprised, right? And for a lot of guys, it's probably occurs when it's maybe late at night after a night out. They haven't been successful, and again, they're like, searching for like a one night stand or something, and so they swipe through, and they lower their standards, right? They lower their standards, and say this person the next day gets this person that's like them, and they match with them. What happens psychologically when you match with somebody, right? I know for me, when I match with somebody, I think, okay, like, this person has, at least on a surface level, approved what I look like, and the details of myself that I've talked about. And in my mind, it thinks, okay, I am on this person's level, right? Because we've matched and we've acknowledged that there is at least somewhat of a baseline mutual attraction. So psychologically, I think, this is my level now. Like, or not necessarily now, but like, if I match with someone who's very attractive woman, then I'm starting to think, okay, like, this is, it's not unheard of. Why can't I match with more attractive women? And I think on dating apps in general, what happens is men lower their standards and women raise their standards. And why is that? It's because one, as we've talked about, that scarcity, right? And that attention based economy, it's men predominantly vying for women's attention. And predominantly, it's women having to go through the pile of men that have said, hey, I like you, and picking the ones that which she likes. So she has the pick of the litter. She has the pick of the pile, whereas the guys are the ones throwing themselves in the pile. So what's going to happen with that is that there's going to be less matches for the men, and so therefore they lower their standard, and there's going to be more matches for the women, so therefore they raise their standard. And when I say that, I'm comparing to, say, real life interactions. So with that comes an imbalance, and the imbalance is where women who, let's say, they're of a certain desirability, place themselves at a higher desirability than what would normally be typical in a real life interaction or in just real life. And as I mentioned, when you have that match with somebody, it kind of baseline, you think, I'm on this person's level, this person has found me desirable, so this is what my standard should be. Now, I think going back to how every guy and likely girl has had that experience where you've matched with somebody and you kind of forget, like you don't think you like them, you can't really believe it. I think it's hard to kind of give that empathy or give that kind of perspective where you think, why would that person like me? Are they actually interested in me, or is it sexual based, or were they a bit desperate? I think most of us, we don't want to think that. Like, we don't want to think that really attractive person that sent us a like or matched with us only wanted us because they were drunk and wanted a one night stand and they were desperate in those, like, for the hour before they passed out. Like, no one wants to think that about themselves, even though objectively that is the reality that happens a lot of the time. So putting myself in a woman's shoes, and I know I got to tread carefully here, but I think it's a valid conversation to have, and I'm definitely not somebody who subscribes to like the manosphere beliefs as I've kind of spoken about in my previous episodes. But I think as a woman, if you do match with a really attractive guy and you think to yourself, this is what my level is now. And so it's kind of like, you go from here to here, and it's like, okay, this is what I'll accept, because why would I accept below that when I know I've matched with above this? And in a lot of ways, the guys that kind of engage in that behavior are kind of messing up like the natural equilibrium of how like natural selection works. When we pick partners, like we naturally pick partners that are like similar levels of intelligence and interest and attractiveness physically, right? This is just how it is. Whereas, with this kind of like artificially inflated system, you do have women that are considering guys that would normally not be someone they would consider as, not to say equals, but like viable romantic partners. And with that, you've got these guys who would normally be on the level of say, like another desirable level to do with women. All of a sudden, they're below, because it's happened across the board. Is that women have put the it's happened across the board where women have experienced like an inflation in value, right? And men a decrease. So you've got, I've seen this. It's like you've got guys that I would say are like very desirable, eligible bachelors, right? But they're struggling to find what I would perceive is people on the same level as them, because of this distorted level of who can really get whom. And with that comes a very difficult dating scene. Now, I'm not saying this is potentially a global thing. I know where I live, like I do think it is a difficult dating scene out there, and I'm not alone in sharing that opinion with other men. And I know there will be a lot of women out there saying like, oh, boo hoo, like who cares, like welcome to life. But speaking with like my friends or the people I associate with, and when I've gone traveling, and not to like completely different cultures, but going traveling to Europe and things like this is you do see a kind of difference in the baseline of interactions, where it's like all of a sudden it's like, you know, you're not used to getting that amount of attention from the opposite sex, and you think, oh, like, okay, like this is kind of strange, and then you kind of return home and go back to like the difficult dating scene, and you realize like, okay, like this is something that's embedded, not necessarily in an entire gender, but in a society, and whether it's in Australia or other areas, but it is something that is prevalent. And whether you have like an opinion or whether it matters or not, um, it is a fact, right? And coming back to the link that I made with the manosphere and dating apps, and how I don't think it really gets enough attention as to how that really contributed. When I feel like breaking it down, I think it makes complete sense that I think dating apps in a lot of ways are the creators before Andrew Tate. That Andrew Tate, who is deemed the godfather or the father, isn't actually that at all. He is someone, he is a spawn of the creation of dating apps and the consequences of dating apps. And I know that like around, across the board, there's pessimism when it comes to those kinds of things, where it's like, is someone really going to meet the person that they're going to spend their life with, or at least engage in a meaningful relationship with, on dating apps? I know many people have, of course they have, but over time, it's being taken over by a corporation, right? Who cares about money? They're monetizing attractive women. They're leveraging attractive women to make men pay for a tiered system that uses the same psychology as the pokey machines, right? Which is something called sequential reward. So when someone's using the pokies, and you see people who are addicted to the pokies, they keep on spinning and spinning and spinning. It doesn't matter how much money they sink into it, because they know eventually some kind of win's going to come, right? It doesn't matter if it's going to make up for all their losses. They know that if they just keep on spinning, something's going to happen. And it's the same kind of behavior when, say, a young child is trying to get attention, right? And they're screaming, and they know that if they keep on doing it, eventually that person will come. And that's why, like, you have these issues that happen where sometimes things should be ignored and you cave in, and what's being like programmed is, okay, I shouldn't stop because it'll eventually will happen. And same with the dating apps, is that you keep on swiping and swiping and swiping, because eventually you're going to get a match that you approve of and that you're excited about. And so that's what you're hanging out for. And it doesn't matter if it takes a few days, it doesn't matter if it takes weeks, but psychologically, that's that addiction cycle. And so the match group, what they do is they say, oh, your subscription's expiring, well, let's give that match now. Oh, like you want to match with that really desirable woman, well, let's give you a way to stand above the rest, right? And let's do this rose or whatever it is. And it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. And again, they're only going to do the exact same thing, where they put attractive women on a pedestal, and they make men, be basically the drivers of profit, right, for those apps. And with that comes people who are frustrated, people who feel like it's pointless, and people who feel like they aren't seen by women. And that's, again, the reality is reality, and it's not people's responsibility to give a leg up to people who are struggling in the system. But the fact is, it is a system. You can't deny that it's a system that's being created, and it's no longer organic. It's being orchestrated by codes and company policies and procedures, and a way to maximize profit. It's not being used primarily as a way to facilitate love. It's used as a way to make money. And that's the society we live in. So thinking about the manosphere and incel culture and how these things have contributed, I think Andrew Tate is always referenced. I've referenced him a bunch. Caligula is seen as someone who I guess is that child, and is kind of perpetuating that really kind of shallow based perspective of looks maxing, and you see on his streams that he has no problem talking to women and getting women to want to engage with him, and obviously there's a lot of psychology happening there, but again it's kind of like coming back to this point where it's like, okay, so idolizing the very pinnacle and dismissing people who do not reach that pinnacle, and all of us kind of living in this fantasy of being with that pinnacle as opposed to seeing people who are on our level. So, what are the implications, long term, or what is the point I'm trying to say? Like, should women, I don't know, like give guys a chance like that they normally wouldn't? I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that, you know, if you are a female listening to this and you are, single and you have friends, like think about what I've gone over and how you do have this huge pile of men to pick from, and how that's changed your perspective as to who is and who isn't a viable partner romantically for yourself. And also compare to, like, say, the level of people that you might match with online compared to people who you might interact with in public, whether that lines up greatly, or whether there is a difference. Because I know, like, speaking from my own personal experience, like when I introduce myself or speak to somebody in person, I do find I'm able to engage with people that I would say is on a similar level to me much better than I can on a dating app. Now, of course, maybe I don't have game, or maybe I don't know how to speak to people online, and all these things, very valid different points. But when we look at, again, like, what is a union, and also like what I believe is something that we should strive for, and that is more community among men and women, not necessarily just romantically, but this idea of seeing each other as people, and not necessarily say perceiving men as just catalogs, or men as a list of criteria of like how much one earns, and what are they, like, aesthetically, how do they dress, what kind of tattoos they have, and all these kinds of things. And going back to that, I guess, more intrinsic kind of interaction, and not necessarily lowering our beauty standards, but understanding that a lot of the time they're unrealistic. And I know it's not one way, and I know a lot of this has happened because of men's own misogyny and unfair perspectives towards women. And there's a lot of positives to giving women the power back, right? In that sense of like going from potentially not having a lot of power and being put in uncomfortable positions to having all of the power, and really being able to choose from whoever you really want. I think a lot of women probably would like that very much, and of course, like, it makes sense. But it is just something that's I think doesn't really get enough attention, as there is a monopoly on dating apps. There is a huge company behind it, and they are gouging men in the process of keeping the entity viable. And to guys out there that maybe you kind of like relate or can hear, understand what I'm saying, and think, that's something that is also my experience. I think, not to say like this is about giving advice. For me, I think there's a lot of method to putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, and trying to meet people in person, as opposed to, say, relying on dating apps, like doing the same thing over and over again, trying to expect a different result. It is not necessarily what do they say, the definition of insanity or something like this, but I think, yeah, you can get better pictures. Try and get some good photos with your mates, and go out and get some good photographs or whatever. But I think, respectfully engaging with people in real life, I think for the most people, you're gonna potentially like meet somebody that you wouldn't really meet on dating apps. And that's just obviously like my input. I think it's just an interesting kind of case study to think about what kind of impacts dating apps have on that, on life. And this podcast is about, talking about those oversaturated things that we kind of ignore because they are ever present, and also the way that we accept things as they are. And I don't like the idea of having, a conglomerate corporation dictate how the best way of meeting someone is. Like, I don't like that at all. I would rather have control of that. I would rather dictate my own destiny when it comes to my romantic interests, as I'm sure everyone else would as well. So there is, I guess, that element of not necessarily waking up, but acknowledging, this is a company. This is I think a $1 billion company, and they've grown their company. They've acquired all of the competition, and slowly but surely they're making them all the same. They don't care about the individual. They care about the money that the individual generates. And when we think about what actually benefits our lives, we benefit from real interactions, genuine interactions with people that, I guess, we look at as being on our level. And that's not necessarily just about looks. It's just about, in general, like, people, right? It's like we want to feel like we're associating with people that we relate to and feel like we're on the same level as. And maybe sometime in the future, like, people will veer away from dating apps. It'd be oversaturated kind of thing, but I think it is like a part of our lives so much, and there is that sequential reward system that's happening in our minds that keep us using it. And there is also the element of what it can do to the brain when you do have such a, I guess, large pool to select from, and whether one person is ever really going to satisfy that ever again for a lot of people, because they're able to get it. If you don't fulfill something, then the next person will. And again, that's probably something I'll speak more on. But until next time, you've been watching or listening to Oversaturated Entitled Garbage. My name is Will, and I'll chat with you next week.